Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Pay Transparency in Practice. My name is Veronika Kovačová. I'm the marketing manager at Accace, and I will be moderator for today's webinar. Today, we will walk you through how European countries are implementing the European Directive, and we'll also share a lot of practical information from our speakers. Before we begin, and while we wait for all the attendees to manage to log in and listen to us, let me briefly share some organizational details. So first of all, this webinar is brought to you by Accace Circle Business Community in the project From Local to Global, your expert guide for cross-border growth. This project brings practical insights from industry experts from 60 countries across the globe, and we are doing this through various platforms and formats such as webinars, podcasts, and white papers. For this webinar, we would like to specifically thank our Accace Circle members, Atlas Consulting, Cyprus Audit Services, LDP, who is one of our speakers today, Numeri, SB Accounting and Consulting, Vassal Varias, and Accace, who also has two speakers with us today. Now, speaking about our speakers, I would love to introduce our experts. We have here Agnieszka Samborska, legal advisor and partner from Accace Poland. We also have here Antonella Jacobellis, salary partner and lawyer from LDP Italy, and Silviu Constantin, the legal director at Accace Romania. I would like to also introduce briefly our company Accace, if you're not yet familiar with us, and since we are still waiting for some of our attendees to tune in, we have just a brief moment to stay here for a while. So we are an international company providing both consulting and outsourcing services, focusing on accounting, payroll, tax, transaction, corporate, and legal areas. Our mission is to simplify and support business operations so that clients can focus on growth and innovation. And we also have vast experience with legal and labor law topics, so we are happy to share some of that knowledge with you today. We operate in over 60 countries, work with more than 7,000 professionals, and support over 80,000 clients. We are also celebrating 20 years on the market this year. I would like to pass now the word to Antonella, who will introduce our partner company LDP in Italy.
Thank you to Accace. It's a pleasure to be here to introduce LDP and to talk about this topic. LDP is an international multidisciplinary professional firm delivering integrated advisory services for company and multinational groups. By this expertise with digital innovation, we deliver high-value strategic advisory to support business growth and transformation. As you can read, please consider the most important services: international and national tax advisor, transfer pricing and transaction support, M&A, valuation and financial advisory for strategic and extraordinary operations, corporate law, compliance and contract management, tax, immigration and compliance service for global workforce mobility, accounting, financial reporting, payroll processing, labor consultancy, and real-time HR data solution, employment law advisory, RPA, data analytics, and development of digital solution. LDP therefore operate with a strong international mindset, global expertise, and cross-border experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonella. So just to sum it up, we really have here both the legal and payroll expertise for both companies that really equips us to share some knowledge about the Pay Transparency Directive. As for the agenda for today, we will deep dive into the directive, what it means, what it brings, and how companies should comply. Then we will also provide an overview of how countries are implementing the directive at this very moment. We will show you some selected countries. Then we will spotlight on Italy as one of the countries who have more advanced implementation phase in practice, and then compare it to Romania, who is in a more earlier stage of implementation, to show you how you can prepare based on what is the situation in your country. Then we will finish off with some guidance for businesses and share some implementation plan to give you also some practical knowledge. And at the end, we will dedicate some time for the Q&A session. Now about the Q&A, whenever you see this icon in this broadcast, feel free to click there and submit your questions. At the end, when we finish the slides, we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. But if by any chance we miss some, we will do our best to follow up later on. Now, without further ado, I would like to give word to Agnieszka Samborska, who will now introduce you the general overview of the directory. So Agnieszka, whenever you're ready, you're in control of the slides and you can start.
Thank you, Vera. Welcome, everyone. I have a pleasure to speak today at this webinar about the general rules of the directive. So just let me check whether I have control of the slides.
Can you click on the screen and see if it works?
It does not.
Okay, give me a brief second and I will walk you back there. Can you try now?
It does not work.
Okay,
I have information that you are in control.
Okay, let me then click the slides for you so that we don't keep our webinar with this. Apologies for this.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's start with the general overview of the directive, and the most important thing is first of all to know what the directive is about, and the most of the information are already provided in the title of the directive. That it's to strengthen the application of the principle of equal pay for equal work or work of equal value between men and women through pay transparency and enforcement mechanism. So here we can see several key topics which will be later on also discussed by me, but right now I can say that already it is this the right to equal pay for equal work or work of equal value. And the second topic is the pay gap between men and women, which is really the high problem in European Union right now. And the main obligation which arises from the directive and which are passed on to the member states. But as we know, each member state will require the employers simply to follow this obligation. Is that each employer, not only the big employers, but each employer has pay structures which ensure equal pay for equal work or work for equal value. And last but not least, the deadline for the implementation for all European Union countries is 7th of June 2026. Later on, we will see also how it goes in all the countries. So as you know, the time to 7th of June is really this date is really close, and still not all the countries follow or even started the implementation of the directive. Why? Can you please? Thank you. What is the purpose of the directive? So, as I already mentioned, first of all, this is to reduce this gender pay gap across the European Union. Well, the survey shows that the general gender pay gap between men and women equals to 7 or 8%. It differs from country to country. For example, in Poland, it's higher. But it's like this is general pay gap if we compare all the remuneration of men and women. And in case we are talking about some specialists or special categories of workers, the pay gap may be even higher and can equal even to 20% at some positions where the women earn, of course, less than men. So this is the first aim of the directive, the most important, to ensure the equal pay between the men and women. The second, which is also very important, is the general rules that the workers should earn the same equal remuneration for the same work or work of equal value. The third aim is to increase the transparency in pay structures and ensure that the employers explain employees why their salary, their remuneration is at certain level. And last but not least is to strengthen the enforcement mechanisms, because right now, if there is no enforcement mechanism, like for example fines or right to go to the court to fight for the equal salary, in case there are no such enforcement mechanism, the provisions are, as we can say that, yes, they will not bind, and they will not ensure that the aim of the other directive was achieved. There are several concepts and several definitions which are provided by the directive. I will talk about few. The most important, they are, you can see them on the slide. So first of all, this is the work of equal value, what we should understand under this definition. Pay and pay level, because this can be also differently understood between among the countries. Categories of workers, also very important concept. And the gender pay gap, this will be also discussed by me later on. Next. Thank you. What is the work of equal value? Well, first of all, this is work that is determined to be equal value in accordance with the non-discriminatory and objective gender-neutral criteria. These neutral criteria are provided by the directive, and these are skills, also not only the hard skills but also the soft skills, responsibility and working conditions, effort, and also any other factors which are relevant for the specific job or position. It's very important for each employer to define this criteria, because knowing what are the criteria, the general criteria in our organization, we will be able to create the pay structures. We will be also able to create the categories of workers where we will be able to compare the salary level between the workers. Also, we will be able simply to evaluate the job positions value, in case we have different departments in our company. It's very important that we are able to compare these job positions between different departments, because in such case the pay structures may be seen as non-discriminatory, and we can compare, for example, the position between the payroll and accounting departments, which will allow us to have one pay structure for the whole company. Next. Pay and pay level. Well, pay, this is for sure, first of all, the base salary, but also under the pay, we should understand another elements, such as, for example, the variable and complementary components. For example, bonuses, awards, incentives, benefits, also severance payments, and any other premiums, benefits, compensations, which are paid by the employer to the employee. Pay level. It's also important to know that this is the gross annual pay, or the corresponding gross hourly pay. This definition also appears in the directive quite often. Categories of workers, this I already mentioned, this key concept. This is basically a group of workers which are performing the same work or work of equal value, and the grouping is made by the employer in a non-discriminatory and non-arbitrary manner based on those criteria which are already mentioned. The directive also implies that this agreeing on those criteria should be done in cooperation with the employees' representatives, of course, where applicable and where it's possible to have such such agreement made between employer and the employees' representatives. Next. Gender pay gap. Here, very shortly, the directive gives us such a definition. Also, with the scheme, how we should calculate it. It's basically difference in average pay levels between female and male workers. For male workers of an employer expressed as a percentage of the average pay level of male workers. Here. It's a very simple example on how we should calculate it. First of all, we take the salary of men, deduct salary of women, and we can divide it by the men's salary and multiply by 100%. In our example, for example, men earns 5,000 euro, women 4,000 euro. We can see that at the same position, the gender pay gap amounts to equals to 20%. Next. The directive provides also certain obligations on the employer. Some are imposed on all employers, and some only on the bigger, starting from 100 employees. What applies to all the employers? It's the pay transparency prior to employment. At the stage of recruitment, explicitly, the candidate to work should receive information about the initial pay, its range, which should be, of course, based on objective gender-neutral criteria, and also, where applicable, the relevant provisions of collective agreements applied at the employer. And such information should be provided earlier to employment. For example, in the job advert or or during the negotiations with the employee, but it should be done within such time that should allow the employee to negotiate this salary with the employer. And also, the employers should ensure that job positions and adverts are gender neutral. Next. I will try to speed up here. Also, each employer should make easily accessible to their workers the criteria that are used to determine the workers' pay levels and pay progression. Also, each employee will have the right to request and receive in writing information on individual pay level and the average pay levels broken down by sex for categories of workers performing the same work as them or work of equal value to theirs. And this obligation will apply to each employer. Next. And the reporting obligations, these will apply to larger employers, starting from 100 employees. First, reporting for employers starting from 150 employees should be already done for 2026 by 7th of June 2027. Employers with 100 to 149 employees shall submit relevant information by 7th June 2031. So they have more time to prepare for this obligation. And what is this obligation about? I will tell in 1 second. Can you please, Vera, change the slide? So this reporting obligation, it's quite wide. The employers should report the gender pay gap, complementary in complementary or variable components, median or gender pay gap, median gender pay gap in complementary or variable components, proportion of female and male employees receiving complementary and variable components, proportion of female and male employees in each pay quartile, and also the gender pay gap among employees by employee categories based on basic hourly or monthly pay and complementary and variable components. Next. So This was about the general overview, very quick, very quick general overview of the provisions of the directive. I will go now to the status of the implementation among the selected countries. Next. So first of all, the implementation status. Here we can see that only in Slovakia the directive is confirmed to be effective as of 7th of June 2026. All other countries are not ready yet. In some of the countries, like for example in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Cyprus, the draft of legislation is already published. In other, like Greece, Hungary, or Estonia, we are still waiting for the draft. Next, the date of implementation. So, for example, in Poland, we already have partial implementation, which relates to the recruitment stage. So this part of the directive, this one provision is already implemented. The rest, well, when we were preparing this presentation, we were expecting we will be ready by 7th of June, but just recently we heard that maybe Poland won't be ready within this deadline, what is not surprise. And as you can see, in other countries, they are expected to be on time. Only Czech Republic, Czechia is expected to become effective starting January 1st, 2027. So a little bit later than it is required by the directive. Next. The provisions of the directive, they of course allow the countries to impose also another obligations or strengthen the provisions of the directive, and some of the countries will use such possibility. So here is the map which shows the national differences from the EU directive. As you can see, in Lithuania, Slovakia, and Estonia, the national legislation does not introduce any additional requirements. Some of the countries we do not know yet, like in Greece and Hungary, and in some we already know that this national legislation introduced or will introduce additional requirements. One of the examples is Poland, but I think the most interesting is Spain, where we can see that salary register is already required for all employers, and there is no minimum threshold for that. Next. The reporting obligations. So in marked blue, you can see the countries expected to follow EU thresholds. So these are most of the countries, but we can see also here 2 countries where reporting is already in place, and we can see Spain and Italy, where, as I already mentioned, in Spain, all companies must maintain a salary register. Next. Regarding the penalties, we do not know in all the countries how big the penalties will be, and they are not yet fully defined. But it is expected that the fines for sure will include administrative fines, compensation claims for employees, and corrective obligations for unjustified pay gaps. So where it's not already defined, the countries where it is not already defined, these are, for example, Estonia, Poland, Germany, Romania, and Bulgaria. But in some of the countries, we already see that the fines are defined and are quite high, like, for example, Lithuania, Latvia, and Slovakia.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka, for this beautiful summary and for walking through us the map of the selected Accace Circle member locations. Now we are ready to actually dive a little bit deeper into Italy. So, Antonella, the word is yours.
Thank you. As can be deduced from the interpretation of Agnieszka, the European Directive addresses 3 key gaps in the management of the employment relationship: lack of transparency in company pay system, lack of legal certainty regarding the concept of work of equal value, not only, I add also thanks to Agnieszka, equal pay for equal work, equal pay for the same work, and obstacles preventing victims of discrimination from enforcing their right. As is known, in Italy, the directive must be transposed by June 7. To date, a draft of legislative decree was approved by the Council of Ministers on February 5, and we can say that the same gaps can be considered filled by the draft decree. We will now provide you with some of the most important topics, not all, some of the most important topics covered by the Italian draft decree, but it's important to specify that all my remarks are based on a provisional law that will be approved in the coming week and which may be subject to amendment that are believed not to be substantially. Why I specify this? Because about the Italian draft decree, there are some doubts about the items, for example, included in the useful definition of remuneration. The Italian legislative decree also specify the draft of legislative decree specifies that Italian legislation related to pay transparency applies to public and private employers, permanent and fixed-term contract, job applicants, the candidates, and employees across all categories and levels. Please, next. Many underestimate that the fact that employers must take into account that this regulation imposes obligation not only on existing employees, but also on candidates approaching interview with the company. You might ask why. According to Italian draft decree, companies intended to start interview with potential candidate, with potential new employee, must provide information on salary in job posting and potentially during the interview. And the employer, it's important this point, must in no way ask information about the salary history of the candidate. This is an important point to consider. For this reason, it's important that the HR staff is confident about this new obligation, pre-employment transparency obligation, and in order to guarantee this, LDP is able to provide a sort of lesson dedicated of HR personnel and staff, a training about this topic. For sure, the job posting must be completely gender neutral, as before specified by Agnieszka. Please, next. Not only, during the employment relationship, all employers are required to provide also information about remuneration, as specified during the employment relationship in this case, in the following term. An employee, also through a workers' representative or through a quality body by delegation, can request information at any time on the average pay levels by gender within their category. The second step, the employer is required to respond in writing within 2 months of the request. If the data provided is incomplete, the employer must provide explanation and clarification. The third step, As an alternative to an individual response, the employer may publish the average pay levels by gender on the company intranet or a restricted area of the website. The fourth step is very important. It's the annual notice. It is all provide an obligation to inform all employees annually of their right to request this information and the procedure for doing so. For this purpose, it is not possible to include in contract or in any employment agreement clauses in which the employers prohibit workers from releasing information on their remuneration, which therefore becomes transparent and de facto disclosable data. Also, for this reason, it is important that HR staff is able to reply to the employee request, and for this, LDP is able to provide training and also tailored policy to manage the process of these data and also the relationship between the employers and the employees. Please, next. Also already specified, this is the same obligation provided by the European Directive within the framework indicated by Italian law, which vary based on the employer brackets for each company. Starting from June, companies will be required to send reports that contain the following information: gender pay gap, average and median, gap in supplementary variable pay components, percentage of male and female employees receiving variable component, male and female distribution by pay quartile, pay gap by the employee categories, data for the last 4 years if available. Therefore, the Italian decree scheme specified that this obligation applies only to the employers with at least 100 employees. From this point of view, it is important to be able to have, for example, automated processing, for example, a Power BI that allow to insertion of the salary data based on the criteria provided by a labor consultant, extrapolate the data based on his suggestion, and validate the data by an expert labor consultant or labor lawyer who justify gaps above 5% with gender neutral criteria. Please, next. Why I specify this? This is important because the Italian decree scheme specified that if all 3 of the following conditions are met, there is the obligation to involve in another step after the delivery of the report that include a trade union joint evaluation. In detail, the 3 gaps are gap that refer to at least 5%. Information on the pay gap reveals an average pay difference of at least 5% between male and female. In other words, the report highlights for some employees a gap at least of 5%. This gap, and this is the second step, the second gap, is not justified. The employer has not justified this difference based on objective and gender neutral criteria. This gap is not remedied. The employer has not remedied this difference. We talk about the difference of 5% gap within 6 months from the date of the communication, the date of the delivery of the report of the pay information. Please, next. What can happen if the company is not in compliance with all these obligations that I described before. The following are some potential consequences, some because, and possible and potential, because we talk about a provisional law, not the final test approved in Italian. Potential sanctions are reversal of the burden of proof. Therefore, in the event of compliance, the employer will have to demonstrate that a discriminatory approach has not been adopted by the company. Sanctions to be specified by the final version of the Italian law, not only in case of violation or claims by the workers. We cannot exclude, please, these points are very important to consider, this risk, intervention by National Labour Inspectorate that can start inspection to the company, that regard the company, difficult relationship with the trade union, and claims for compensation by the workers that are involved in the process of a potential discriminatory approach.
Thank you very much, Antonella. It really does seem like Italy has quite clarity in how to approach the Pay Transparency Directive. So this has been extremely valuable. Now we will actually spotlight a little bit on Romania, which is still a little bit in the earlier stage of implementation. So Silvio, whenever you're ready, I'm happy to assist with the slides for you.
Thank you, Vero. Yes, I wasn't going to ask for control. It's okay. So looking at the time, I will adjust my speech a little bit. So what I do want to talk about is the fact that, Romania has the draft of the bill published very recently, and is going to be more or less in line with the European Union. However, it will impose additional requirements for local employers. But more importantly, what I do want to talk about today is, let's say, a more practical approach to what an organization can do in order to become compliant with the directive. I will not reiterate what Aga and Antonella already said, and but I do want to focus on the three main pillars that the employers are going to be looking at. So first of all, the employers will have to develop a job architecture and to perform the evaluation of the job grading itself. We'll go in depth on how that can be done. Additionally, they will have to have the salary bands in place in order to to diminish any divergences of more than 5% from the median, and to make sure that all the salaries are aligned internally and ideally with the market itself. This will be able to be done through salary studies. And third of all, to have the data ready, and this is one of the more important obligations, and let's say easier to overlook, because we all know that very, very famous principle, garbage in, garbage out. So even if you have all the policies in place, even you have the job grading done, if you don't have the right data at your disposal, you won't be able to make them operational. If you can move to the following slide, please, on the implementation plan. You can also move to the second one. Okay, so this is a solution which basically any employer in Europe, in the European Union, affected by the European Union directive, will be able to implement in order to, let's say, answer the requirements of the EU directive and become 100% compliant with its provision, regardless of local laws. Obviously, if the local laws will develop or will impose additional sanctions, very specific additional sanctions, this will have to be accounted for. But in this case, at this point, this solution should be enough in order to make them compliant. How we thought about it is you need to start with an audit, right? You need to have a diagnosis on where you are. You need to perform a gap analysis on what the local requirements are and where you stand in order to develop a roadmap of actions to address them. Let's say You have the bands, you have some sort of internal, an employee handbook explaining, or a career path in place, explaining how the band progression or the promotion works, but you don't have the criteria, the underlying criteria for the job evaluation, which as the EU directive imposes, will be mandatory. Now, the audit should be able to relieve this, should be able to show this, and it will tell you where to act and how to act. Once you have the roadmap, assuming you don't have anything, right? Assume you need to start from scratch. You need to perform the job grading itself. The way you do this is start by identifying what criteria you need to implement. And in order to do this, you need to go to the key stakeholders of your company, interview them, discuss with them, look at what job descriptions you have in place, and try to identify what actually matters for your organization. Think of it like this way, okay? You have a production company which you need to evaluate. You have a blue-collar worker working in the factory, and you have a senior marketer position in the same company. If for the blue-collar operator, what matters most is the criteria such as effort, or let's say work conditions, because he works in the factory. For the marketer working in the office, the conditions will not have that much of a bearing on the evaluation. This is why you need to go and identify what criterion is key for each role. I will talk more about the criteria in a second. Once you have the criteria, you have to develop the methodology. Usually the consultant should be able to walk you through the entire process, but you need to have the methodology for the evaluation. You need to apply the methodology to each individual position in your company. If you do this, you should be presented with a matrix of the job hierarchy, with each individual position having a certain scoring. And once you have this scoring, you are able to develop the job families. Obviously, this is a very simplistic approach, but or let's say a very simplistic explanation, but going in depth, you will be able to develop these job families in a way that makes sense for you. After you have the hierarchy matrix and the list of jobs in, let's say, a descending value sorting, you can start creating the bands and try to attribute every position in the band so that it makes sense for you. Obviously, you will need to work very closely with let's say the consultant should work very closely with your key stakeholders in order to adjust and identify the discrepancies that may arise, because there will be discrepancies. And those discrepancies may warrant a specific adjustment of the scoring or even the criteria, the underlying criteria itself. Basically, once you have the bands in place, you should be able to have a very clear picture of what adjustments in terms of salary and budget you need to make so as to remedy the discrepancies of more than 5%. Obviously, we're talking about discrepancies that are not justified, right? Okay, and going into let's say the last part of the process that usually occurs at the same time. Once you do the evaluation and you include every job family in a band, and let's say you have already adjusted the band, you need to look at your performance management process so that you can make sure that your career path is well done, your band progression is properly done, your promotion between roles is properly documented, and you will have to write everything down and be able to present it in case of scrutiny. And obviously, then come the corrections which need to be done once you see that even after the entire process, there will be some roles. And when I'm talking about corrections, I'm talking about salary corrections, right? Remuneration corrections, because it's not just salary. As Antonella and Agal both said, it includes all fixed and variable payments to the worker. If you can move along a little bit, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, what we see here on the screen are, let's say, on the left we have the main criteria issued more than 50 years ago by the International Labour Authority and taken by the directive as they are. But you do need to keep in mind that, as I said, you need to account for what works for you. If you need to develop additional criteria, you can do it. It's totally up to the organization, as long as they are objective, they are transparently presented, and they are applied without bias, obviously. As in the example before, in the, let's say, factory worker versus marketer, as I said, perhaps for the marketer, it accounts more for complexity because there are various platforms they need to understand. Perhaps they have autonomy over the marketing strategy at some point, and they do need to account for with decision authority. Whereas the factory worker does not have decision autonomy, but it does have an additional effort and work conditions that need to be accounted for. So keep in mind that you need to develop what works for you, because otherwise your results will be inconsistent. If we can move along a little bit. Going back to the actual, or let's say going forward with the actual scoring, I have an example on the screen for you. We have a hierarchy of jobs. We have, let's say, the CFO, the IT director, some senior legal manager. We have applied the basic criteria to them. We got some results, and we were able to include them in the salary family, or let's say in the bands, so that you can see how it would look like in case you choose to go with the standard approach. What you do need to understand is that you cannot do this without hard data. So you need to collect them, you need to be able to present them and aggregate them, and you need to document them properly. One main challenge we identified when presenting this service to our clients and to the leads with whom we have been in contact is that they don't know from where to start. They have no idea where to start. We give them the solution, we show them how to approach it and how to grasp it, but they always ask us the same question: will you be doing it along with us? And the answer must be the same. So for everybody that is participating in this meeting and representing companies, do keep in mind that you need to be involved in the process from start to end, because they should not present you with a, let's say, turnkey solution, but they should work alongside you in developing the whole architecture that works for your organization. Now, I think we still have 12 minutes of Q&A, Vera. I tried to be as brief as possible, and I only went like 4 minutes above the deadline.
No worries, Silvio. Thank you so much. I think this has been extremely useful for all our listeners. And yes, let's move into the Q&A session. Actually, we do have a lot of questions. I just want to assure the audience that there will be a recording of this whole webinar. It will be distributed to everybody who joined. So if by any chance you cannot stay till we finish all the questions, because it may go a couple minutes over time, it will be delivered to you through the recording via email after the webinar. Now, I also want to clarify before I ask the questions why only these countries were presented today. So we have selected some specific countries from the Accace Circle business community. But it doesn't mean that other countries are not having various levels of implementation status and progression. So with that being said, I would maybe address the very first question to Agnieszka, because it is a question about the pay progression. And one of our listeners are asking, what does it mean, the pay progression? Is it within the same grade or progression to the next grade level?
Well, it means simply the pay progression in the during the process of employment of a person. Specific person should know at what conditions it can she or he can count on the increase of the salary, basically. So this is for each employee. The best if we do it by the job positions or the categories or the categories of workers, that each person should know when it is possible to have the pay increased. So for bigger companies, it will be necessary to build and draft some policies. But for smaller ones, there should be also some policy, but in fact, it does not have to be very complicated. It is really important that the employee should know whether, for example, it is done once by a year, like a job evaluation, or what aspects should be fulfilled by this person, or even by the company to have the pay progression in place.
Thank you so much. We have also another question, actually more questions asking about the pay difference. So maybe Antonella, I will direct this question to you. What is an objective reason that can justify a 5% salary gap?
Okay, I will give you an explanatory example. For example, John receive a high salary than Mary because he has a degree and no English language. And these two factors of his background have a positive impact of his role and his career. This is a completely neutral gender factor and criteria. The language, English language, and the degree.
I see. Thank you so much for that answer. Maybe we can next move to Romania. We have a specific question for Romania, actually. If we are talking about only gender payment equity or payment equity generally.
So a thing I like to say when talking about this is that the European legislator started from gender pay equity and ended out with pay equity as a whole. So I would say that there is no way that we limit ourselves to gender pay equity, and it's very risky to think of it like this, because it may be the case, and it's very probable that looking at, let's say, at local legislation and at how the directive is written, you will be presented with disputes between persons of same gender if there is discrimination there. And let's not forget that discrimination laws are in place throughout Europe regardless of the directive. So this may be on gender pay equity, but what the directive does and what the local laws will do is give the employees the tools to obtain the information with which to bring forth discrimination claims afterwards. So it's let's say it's a multi-tool kit that the employees now have, and this is one of them. But you do have underlying anti-discrimination laws throughout the entire Europe.
Wonderful. Thank you for the very thorough answer. Another answer or question is, it came during Agnieszka's part, so maybe Agnieszka will direct it to you, but if you would like to share it with the rest of the speakers, feel free to. The question is, under Article 7, what elements shall we give employees? Base salary or pay with all elements? Because this is not clear in the directive. You're muted.
Sorry. So, in my opinion, what should be provided is the base salary plus the other components. This should be provided to the employee.
Thank you so much.
Veronica,
yes, please go on.
Is it possible to add something about it? Because this is an important point of the Italian decree scheme. Why? Because the Italian law actually is completely confusing about the definition of salary, because give us two definitions. One is about base salary, one included also variable component, etc., etc. We hope that the final text of the Italian decree specify which definition we can consider. Obviously, in my opinion, I completely agree with Agnieszka, we can consider the definition of salary that include all components, variable, de facto remuneration, etc., etc.
Thank you so
This
much.
is in fact the also, you know, the definition of the salary of the pay, which is provided already by Polish law. That's why we expect that in Poland it will cover all the components.
What we are seeing in Romania, sorry, Vera, I wanted to add something. What we are seeing in Romania in the bill, the Romanian legislator went above and beyond and actually laid down nominally what components will be reported, or let's say will be communicated beside the base salary. And although we are able to identify them, the main challenge will be, let's say, divide them into base, fixed, and variable. The main challenge will be, and I imagine this will be for the same for other countries as well, to actually quantify them. Because imagine that an employee receives the same base salary, the same bonus, yearly bonus as the other, but one of them has, let's say, a work car, which is a benefit. Now you do have to quantify that work car. Now, what do you do if you have different cars, two employees with different cars? One has a luxury one or a newer one, and the other one has an older one. So basically, and when employees become frustrated, these types of claims can arise. And this is a challenge which we are debating internally as well.
Thank you so much for that valuable addition. Actually, I wanted to ask if you have anything to add to this question, but moving on, maybe Antonella, you can help me with this answer. So basically people cannot ask information about the candidate's salary profiles, but can we ask the maybe headhunters for that information?
No, because it's completely prohibited to ask for information about the candidate's salary history, also through third party as a headhunter.
Very interesting.
Veronica, it's possible, backtracking about the Agnieszka question about pay progression, because I think it's an important point also for Italy. Why? Because for some company it's very difficult to define a roadmap, a process about pay progression. For this reason, I again completely agree with Agnieszka. It's very important to provide a policy about it, a standard, a process, etc., etc.
Thank you very much for the answer. Let's move to the next question, and the question is, maybe Silvio, this will be more for you because you were talking about the practical side and implementation. So the question is, what should we do if there are not enough comparable positions within one category?
Then you will end up with a band containing only one position, because it is what it is. The challenge will arise when, or let's say the main risk arises when because if you have one employee in one band, it is what it is. The minimum is, and the minimum, the maximum, and the median is the same. You can develop a band, let's say adjust the minimum and the maximum just to have a band in case you choose to recruit other individuals on that position. But let's say a bigger challenge would be what happens when you have only two employees in one band, and how are you able to provide information about the band to an employee without disclosing de facto the other one's remuneration. And usually how this works is you have to operate through, at least in Romania, you have to operate through the authorities. So you as an employer can refuse to provide this information directly to the employee, but you can provide it to the authority, who in turn will assess it and explain to the employee and provide the employee the fact that he's not being discriminated with more than 5%, or let's say there is no deviation to from the median.
Thank you so much.
Or there is, I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, you end up with only one position. Going back to the question, you end up with one position in the band. This is not uncommon.
We are a little bit tight on time, but let's keep space also for 2 more questions. And then what I will do, I will gather all the unanswered questions, run it through our experts, and we will try our best to publish them as soon as possible on the website. So everyone who is attending today and now, you should receive it later on through some newsletter that we will be sending out. Now, the 2 remaining questions, one of them, and I will let whomever speaker to reply. But one of the questions is that there are already 2 countries in Europe who have postponed the implementation of the pay transparency. They are namely Sweden and Finland. And what happens if the European countries do not publish local legislation to implement this directive?
I can speak for Poland, so I think basically nothing for at least some time. When the European Union will be interested about it, then maybe will be some fines imposed on Poland. But we already know that most probably we won't be on time. And for example, in case of whistleblowers, Poland was 2 years after the deadline. And nothing happened, so we will. I think it will go this way.
So theoretically, as Aga is saying, yeah, theoretically you are being under infringement by the Commission. Practically, we'll have to see whether the Commission actually takes action against certain countries.
Yeah, I agree, but we hope that Italy will be on time.
Yeah. I am also confident that Romania
sure.
is going to be on time as well.
Well, in practice, it's not so important whether the countries are in time because the provisions should be implemented anyway. And all the process which Silviu already described can be already implemented. And the employers should not wait until the directive is implemented because, as you can see, it's really a lot of work to create the categories, to evaluate and grade the job positions. So there is really no point to wait, especially for bigger employees with the implementation.
Exactly. And also what I want to add here is that what we're trying to say to everyone, and I hope this is useful, it's not the authorities you have to think of because the fines may not be that big or let's say that disruptive. It's going to be the fact that the employees will learn about these laws or this directive from friends, from news, from whatever, and they will start raising claims. And once they become frustrated, you will become super swamped with requests and claims on transparency. This is the main deterrent which you have to avoid.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And let's move to the very last question. I'm going to be honest, maybe this is a little bit a difficult question, but more people are actually asking like how to proceed in case of non-binary employees. One of the listeners is writing that we have a significant number in our company, and given the current EU regulations, it would not be appropriate to classify them as either female or male.
In Romania, we do not have local legislation on the differentiation, so our personal numerical numbers start with a specific number depending on the gender of the individual. However, if you want to, this is my opinion as well, if you want to mitigate the risk, you can obtain their, let's say, their written statement on how they identify as, so that this would prevent the substance of, or let's say, diminish the substance of a future claim. They will not be able to argue that they are being discriminated against men if she identifies as a male.
So perhaps in this case, what we could advise to the listeners is to refer to the local law and how the local legislation handles these situations.
It's a very specific topic that needs to be assessed internally, yes.
Thank you so much for answering that. We're actually a little bit over the time. We still have a lot of questions, but as I mentioned, we will do our best to answer them and share them publicly so that everyone and anyone can benefit from those answers, and we will make sure that those reach our audience today. So since we are coming to the end, actually, I would like to thank our speakers for sharing their valuable insights about pay transparency in Europe. These are the contact details, so anyone from the audience may have any follow-up questions or would like to get in touch to solve pay transparency related issues or challenges, please feel free to do so. I would also like to thank our audience for joining us today and for being part of this webinar, especially for the very valuable questions. We really hope that this session gave you a clear understanding of the new directive and what to expect when it comes to compliance. If you have any other further questions, as I mentioned, feel free to reach out to us after the webinar. As a follow-up, as I promised, we will be sharing the presentation, the webinar recording, and the short feedback form via email so that you can share your opinion and what we can improve next time or what other topics we can cover for you. So thank you again, and we really look forward to seeing you all at our other upcoming events. Have a wonderful rest of the day.